Welcome to Trending in Education, the Mindshifting edition. You know, everyone's excited about Minecraft. We're going to talk about mind shifting today. I'm joined by an educator, a speaker, an author. Mitch Weisburgh is joining me today. Welcome to the show, Mitch.
Michael, thank you. And I was amazed to find out, like, you've been doing this since like 2016, right?
Correct.
Like,
Yes.
wow.
Yeah, depending on when this comes out, it's going to be right around episode 700. So we're standing on the shoulders of giants, as they say. And then we always start when folks first appear on the show to get some context in their own words. Can you catch us up on your origin story, your founder's tale as kind of the godfather of mind shifting?
Okay. All right. So I guess my background from around 1981 was in professional development, but professional development more for individuals and businesses, because I was teaching people how to use computers.
Sure.
And I did that. I started a business, but in
the
around
PC, 1981, the PC was about to go big.
the Apple II. I was going to Columbia Business School, and working full time. And I bought an Apple II Plus to help me with my homework, because like working full time and doing homework and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And I was sitting on the train going into New York with my dad, and I was saying, you're not going to believe this. I bought an Apple II Plus, and I'm doing my finance homework in about 20% of the time of anybody else. And I'm doing better than they are because I'm doing what ifs. And they, back then, we talk about spreadsheets, okay, as if they're electronic spreadsheets. But originally, a spreadsheet was a green piece of paper spread out.
Not a lot of pivot tables in that thing. Not a lot of formulas, none of that.
So I'm talking to my dad on the train, and this guy gets up and he says, I just bought an Apple II, and it comes with 6 boxes and 5 different manuals, and I have no idea what to do. Can you just show me how to do a cash flow analysis? So I taught him, and then I get back to my office, and there's a call from a friend of his who just wants to do, financial statements. And so I taught him, and then another call. And I found, that 2 to 3 times a week, I was teaching people how to use VisiCalc or WordStar or whatever, and working full time and going to business school. It's like, I got to stop this. Okay. The next guy who calls, I'm going to charge him, and then I'll never have to do this again. Right. And so the next guy called, and fine, I can show you how to do your word processing or whatever it was. It'll be $200. And he says, fine, can you come over tomorrow? And you could have flipped me with a feather. Like, it was like, oh my gosh. And so, I started charging, and then it's like, well, this could be a business. So I started a business, and we grew. This was in 1981. So by 1993, we had 7 offices. We had 130 employees. We had, and it was growing. But, like by 1995, 1996, I could tell that, this was going to come to an end, because with Windows, if you learned Word in 1999, you can use Word today. Okay. But back in the old days, it's like
each version was a whole separate thing.
You had to be trained in it. So, if you know how to use Word, you know how to use, Google word processing. They're all very similar.
So you had to jump that S-curve.
I had to jump it, and I decided that I'd met somebody who had worked for the Princeton Review, and he said kids wanted to learn the SAT online. They didn't want to take classes anymore. And you're from
this is my neck of the woods. E-learning too. I'm an OG, man. I know what you're talking about.
So I designed a learning management system around test prep and an SAT prep course with the premise that you had learning objectives, the things you had to learn in order to pass the course. There were learning modules based on those learning objectives, and there were questions based on those learning objectives. And you could start anywhere. You could say, these are my learning objectives. Show me the learning modules. These are my learning objectives. Give me quizzes.
We were, in the equivalent of the e-learning space race, we were like rival factions. I was part of the Kaplan mothership who was developing similar stuff.
Yep.
And then you, Rebel Alliance, were getting your stuff off the ground,
So I decided, we built it, and the first course. And of course, my background in instructional design and learning and systems and all that kind of stuff. Go to visit some venture capitalists to scale it. And one of them took me aside and says, Mitch, what you've built is really interesting. This is the way e-learning should be taught.
Yeah.
but your partner knows nothing about sales and marketing to schools, and his plan is going to fail. You need to talk to education publishers and you need to start working with them because
Interesting.
they need to
Yeah.
take their textbooks
Yeah.
and bring them into the current century. And
Makes
this is
sense.
around 2002, 2003.
Yeah.
So,
That's
so I
smart. So
grad,
go to publishers as opposed to try to sell into K-12.
yeah.
Yeah. Mhm.
So I started advising publishers on taking their textbook content. And the first huge one was with Thompson Learning, which was
Mhm.
big at the time
Sure. I
in
remember.
education.
Yeah.
And they wanted to start an online high school. So it ended up developing, well, not me personally, because we hired
Yeah.
people, but but we developed like 30, 35 courses for them for an online high school.
Yeah.
And I guess one of the funny stories is, one of the courses is calculus.
Sure.
Now,
Yeah.
I'm at the time, 50 years old, 45 years old. I haven't had calculus since high school.
Right.
And I have to proof the calculus problems. Okay?
Nice.
And I have
Yeah.
a daughter who's taking calculus.
Ah, that works. Yeah.
So yeah, I thought this is great. Okay. So I start doing some of the problems. I ran into a problem. I bring it to my daughter. I said, Rosie, I have to proof. I have no idea. How do I do this? And she looks at me. She says, Dad, I have a lot of faith in you. I know with hard work, you're going to figure it out.
Wow.
So I'm going to let you learn and grow on your own.
Wow. Growth mindset from the next generation. Who
And
knew?
it's like, darn, all the things I've been telling her, she's supposed to use them against me, right? So I had to relearn calculus and,
Yeah.
and go through that.
I'm still team calculus. I know people, everybody's excited about statistics and, and like data literacy and all that kind of stuff. Absolutely.
Mhm.
But I still think there's some I mentioned an S curve,
Right.
points of inflection. It's nice to
Mhm.
actually know what functions are and try to think about variables. There's sort of a foundational way of thinking, a mindset, Mitch,
Yep.
that you get with, say, calculus.
Yep. So I started working with the education publishers, and it's like, I'm thinking, our education system is doing a disservice to so many kids, and technology can really make a difference. And so started a company to work with education publishers. And as part of it was, how do you build products that kids can use and teachers can use in the classroom? And then how do you sell them into schools?
Right.
And, at the same time, I'm taking a bunch of self-improvement courses and, I guess around 2016, 2017, I'm thinking, I've now been doing this for 14 years.
Yeah.
And education really hasn't been doing a better job with the kids. We're
Yeah.
still in the same spot. It's like, what's wrong? Why
Right.
can't we do a better job? And in 2017, I get an email from a university in Niger saying, as an ed tech entrepreneur, can you come and speak to our undergraduates about education technology? And I'm like, yeah, I don't, education technology in U.S. schools is going to be very, very different from schools in Niger. So
Yeah.
I don't know, but I'm still wrestling with this issue. You know something? Why don't I teach them how to be successful? Why
Yeah.
don't I teach them how to make sense of situations the
Yeah.
same way successful people do?
Abstracted it a little bit.
Yeah. So instead of talking about education technology, so I emailed the guy, the head of the university back, figuring, well, that's probably it. But then he emails me back and we go back and forth. I think in that tape, it wasn't Zoom, it was Skype. Okay.
Sure.
So we Skype back and forth. And we decide that I'm going to go to Niger and teach two-day workshops for their undergraduates. And so we decided that in like June or July of 2017. So I was going to go out in February of 2018. And
Yeah.
then I'm like, Mitch, you don't know how to do this.
Right.
Like, I've read some books. I've taken, different self-improvement courses. I've studied neurolinguistic programming, but I've never taught this before to anybody.
Sure. Yeah.
So, but I had 5 months. And so I read books on how you make decisions, but from many different standpoints, from, psychology, from neuroscience, from cognitive science, from economics, from coaching, from sales, from military strategy. And it's like every one of those has a piece.
Sure.
But nobody really put it all together.
How do you synthesize it? How do you get it all, to come together? And then if I'm hearing you 5 months, This reminds me of the old Abe Lincoln quote, if you give me 5 hours to cut down a tree, I'm going to spend the first 4 sharpening my axe. Yeah, a little bit of time, 5 months,
So
you can
5
start to
months.
put some stuff together.
Yep. Yep. So I put this together into what I figured was a 2-day course, flew out to Niamey,
Mm,
Niger,
yeah.
would teach the first course to like 60, 70, I'm going to call them kids, but they're 18 to 25-year-olds. So they're
Yeah.
kind of young adults.
Hmm.
And at the end of the 2 days, I'm like, and that's sense making. And they stood up and cheered.
Wow.
So it's like, okay, so this is the nerve because nobody teaches the
Yeah.
kids
And
or
this,
actually anybody.
yeah. And the language you were using was sense making, because I've heard that more recently as something that is picking up, but this might have been more, you were kind of tip of the spear on some of that thinking.
Well, so I called it sense making, and I called it sense making because I'd seen books on
Yep.
sense making, and there's a person named David Snowden who was doing consulting, and he called it sense making. So it's like,
Yeah.
okay, I'll call it sense making.
Hmm.
Since then, people have said, look, nobody understands the term sense making. Why don't you use the word mind shifting because you're shifting mindsets?
Yeah.
So that's what I've been using. I'm not sure that that's the right term either.
Interesting.
But since 2018, I gradually shifted my focus from talking to education publishers to,
Hmm.
something, this is something that we need because everybody needs to learn how to become more resourceful, needs
Hmm.
to learn how to become more resilient, and needs to
Yeah.
be able to become more collaborative. And
Hmm.
that's what's going to help us all move forward. And so
That,
that's what my focus has been.
that's great. Yeah. It reminds me of, it's almost like Maslowian. You're kind of elevating towards this transcendent level where you started as, just helping people with their software. Then that sort of leveled up to helping across K-12. Then you start to kind of level up again and help people in Niger and all around the world, whoever you might run into.
Hmm.
There's some foundational kind of tools of thought, ways of thinking, ways of shifting your mindset that
Yep.
wind up being drivers of the kind of resilience and resourcefulness. I know you talk about those things as well, that kind of equips us for the, I've heard it called VUCA,
Right.
disruptive extreme environment that we're living. I've also heard it called the permacrisis, that like we're in this perpetual state of disruption. Cycle times have gotten a lot faster. And then rather than teach skills that might decay because the technology changes, instead, how do you start to train people on more like foundational mindsets and ways of kind of approaching the world that really equip us for a lot of modern life's complexity?
Well, that makes sense to me. Where do I learn that?
Yeah. Right.
Oh, that's right. I teach it. Oh, that's right.
Exactly. Yeah. Although there is that old saw or relatively new saw, I believe it is the way you really learn stuff is by teaching.
Right.
And frequently how, especially I talk to people so much, the way I understand what I think is by having conversations.
Hmm.
And then there's plenty of time to reflect on that and or edit it, in which case you cozy up to the conversation. Also, listening to podcasts is another way that I kind of continue
Yep.
to stay fresh, because the number of different perspectives you can be exposed to on sort of complex ideas,
Yep.
we've never lived in it. And also the speed with which you can take it in, because there's a lot of like fast take, hot take kind of culture. And then I'm a notorious speed listener. It's
Yeah.
got to be at
Hmm.
least 2x for me to, to pay attention. So fast forward that into now, and actually this mindset, it might be interesting to look back on
Hmm.
even some of the more recent disruptions and how your mind shifting kind of connects to first COVID and now
Right.
like the age of AI. What's happening now, and maybe kind of take us through the genesis of this
Hmm.
into, you talk about 2017 till now. It's not 10 years, but it feels like
Feels like a long
multiple.
time.
Yeah, Thomas Kuhn and like paradigm shifts, scientific revolution. It does feel like we've been kind of forced into several mind shifts
Yep.
in the last 10 years.
Yep. Well, so in education, for example,
Hmm.
because I'm trying to reach more teachers so that teachers can reach more kids. So in
Yeah.
education, we have the situation where we have low student achievement rates, right? We have lower than we want graduation rates, and we have high teacher turnover.
Yes.
Burnout is a big part of it. Where we want to go is high student achievement rates, high student graduation rates, and low teacher turnover, low burnout rates among teachers and kids.
Yeah.
So the way I see it is that in order for that to take place, yes, there are individual solutions, but the core transfunctional solution has to be building resourcefulness, resilience, and collaboration. And the resourcefulness parts of it are, how do you become aware of when your mind is holding you back? Because so much of what happens is our own survival instincts prevent us from being resourceful. So how do you become aware of it? And then second, how do you intercept that so that you can quiet those areas of the mind down? And once they're quieted, how do you then tap into your most resourceful parts of the mind? So awareness, intercept, and then what I call, self-commanding. And those then I build into like the first course, which is mastering your resourceful brain, or my first book, which is, Mindshifting, stop your brain from sabotaging your happiness and success. So that's kind of the first tier.
Nice.
The second tier is, how do you be more resilient? Because we go into situations and we suspect that the first thing that we do is going to be the right thing and it's going to succeed.
Yeah.
And so many situations that we go into, and maybe there's multiple things that could be done. So what we think should be done may work, but there may be other things that could work. And it really wouldn't matter which one we did as long as all of us are working together.
Yeah.
So many other things that we do, we go into and they're new and nobody has the right answer. And what's the thing that's going to emerge is going to emerge over time. So what we have to do is we have to do trials or probes in order to get information back. And instead of getting that information back and thinking, oh my gosh, I failed, I better give up. Or, oh my gosh, this didn't work, it's this person's fault. Or I'm always the victim. It's, so instead of judging results, how do we get prepared so that we can use those results to move forward?
Right.
To me, that's resilience. And part of it is understanding the nature of the situations that we're going into. Yeah, there are some things where there's a simple answer. If I'm thirsty and I have a mug in front of me, I'm no longer thirsty. That's a simple problem. Okay.
Right.
Or complicated problems. If I want to build a school, I can go to 5 different architects, and if they're well trained and if they understand the environment, they're going to come up with 5 very different designs. Any one of them could probably work.
Yeah.
Okay?
Right.
But if I'm fighting for architect 1 and my electrician is arguing for architect 2, we're never going to move forward. Okay. So how do you solve complicated problems? And then complex problems, which are kind of new, nobody really knows. How do you problem solve in those situations?
Yeah.
And how do you prepare that the thing that you're going to be doing is going to be giving you information back, not succeed or fail.
Yeah.
And so that you can take the information and then adjust. So that's resilience, is being able to act, take information as feedback, and then adjust and act again.
Yeah, that reminds me of Mike Tyson, although I think it's a military thing he was quoting, but, no plan survives the first, punch in the mouth. The best laid plans, don't escape contact with the enemy. And whether the enemy is an actual individual or is it a complex system that an individual has to relate to, also reminds me of the Nelson Mandela quote, I never lose, I either win or learn. You have to have those test balloons out there, those, experimental conditions that you don't really learn from until something surprising happens. I was anticipating this, and instead it's like the old saw too around the engineer when confronted with a problem is like, interesting, as opposed to, oh my God, it's a problem. It's like, what am I going to do about it?
Anti-fragility is another way of thinking about it. Or Dwight Eisenhower was like, plans are worthless. Planning is invaluable.
Nice. I like that.
So that's the resilience part of it. So you got resourcefulness, you got resilience. And then the next part is the collaboration. Right. And that's like, whatever we do, we're going to be doing it with or around other people. Okay. Right. And some of those people are going to oppose us. Some of those people are going to try to harm us. Some of those people inadvertently, maybe, are just going to get in our way. Some of those people we're just not going to like.
Yeah.
And our natural instincts for dealing with those types of things either don't work or only work for short periods of time, like rewards and punishments. Okay.
Yeah.
I can reward somebody or I can punish them and I can get them maybe once to do something.
Right.
But they're going to learn to hide. They're
Yeah.
going to learn to do what they want to do away from me or to go around me or
Yeah.
something. So
It's
how
like,
do you,
I always think of that one as kind of like game theory and
yep,
kind of like
yep,
team sports. Like it's a
yep.
mix of those two things where if you think about the game theory nowadays, it makes a lot of sense to be a good team player whose team consistently win because that's ultimately the way a lot of our
Mhm.
world is structured.
Right. So in collaboration, first of all, we should learn, say, flexibility. There's 5 different styles for dealing with conflict. So
Yeah.
understanding those styles, understanding what our default style is, and understanding, how we can deploy the different styles in different types of situations.
Yeah.
And then the next step is understanding how to connect to people.
Mhm.
So, because if we try to convince people through facts
Right.
or logic, and we're not already connected to them, we don't have
Yeah.
rapport with them,
Yeah.
it's just going to fall flat. So how do
Yeah.
you establish connections is the second part of that. And then the
Mhm.
third part of that is then knowing that we have the connection with these people, how do we then move forward so that our all of our needs are really satisfied,
Got it.
right? And
Yeah.
proceed forward. So those are the 3 parts, and that's really the third course or
Nice.
the third book, which is on collaboration and conflict.
So
So
do we have like nested tripartites here? Would you have three
yes,
things with three sub things? Like
exactly,
that's
exactly.
nice rule of 9 thinking, and that's a pretty effective framework as you laid it out here. Taking a step back though, AI is something that's sort of recently emerged into the scene. You talked about being collaborative with other humans. I imagine now increasingly we're also going to have to be collaborative with other types of agents. We're going to have to
Right.
be resourceful and resilient and collaborative to really navigate through the transformations that are happening around artificial intelligence. It is
Mhm.
2025 and I do a trend spotting show about education. So I'm bringing up AI because it's an interesting test case perhaps to flow through some of your frameworks there. What are your impressions on this as a transformation, a hype cycle? What are your thoughts?
It's all of that.
Yeah.
It's going to transform everything
Yeah.
and it's going to be hyped. And the things that we think it's going to do, it either won't do or it will do different things. Like when we look at how AI is most often used by kids today,
Hmm.
it's to avoid doing the work.
Right.
But you can't learn by
Right.
avoiding doing the work. You can get the output. And so our methods of measuring kids' output, saying, did you get an A on this? Did you produce this essay? Did you produce this document?
Yeah.
If that's really what we're measuring, then kids are doing the AI, to get their rewards and punishment,
Yeah.
but they're not doing the work. On the
Right.
other hand, AI can be so valuable. I use it all the time. Generally, the first thing that comes back from AI is not particularly usable.
Hmm.
So being able to be resourceful and resilient, to be able
Yeah.
to say, hey, something, this came back, but like, let me tweak this a little bit and let me
Yeah.
maybe go to a different AI agent and see what that has. Let me talk to another person. Let me
Yeah.
think about this for a moment. How do you use AI to spur our own ability to practice things? So those are the things that eventually will figure out, hopefully, how to use AI in school rather than merely put AI out there and say, something, this is a way for us to reduce the cost of educating kids so we can have fewer teachers
Right.
and more kids per adult. And so we can
Mhm.
reduce taxes and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Our job is to train the next generation so that they can lead us. So we all can retire to a beach while they do all the work. Right. And that's
Right.
not going to
Right.
happen if they're not learning.
Yeah. I've been hearing interesting ideas also about how AIs over time might make our human interactions more meaningful or more targeted or more collaborative. Like the example I've heard is the Stephen Koslin, learning science guy
Mhm.
doing great work. He's been on the show a few times. He talks about jigsaw problems. It's basically a complicated way to do breakouts is kind of
Mhm.
like a one way to talk about it. But like that's a place where AI, online learning and AI allow for more dynamic collaboration and you're forming groups and you're reforming them. And there are ways in which over time, more sophisticated interventions become a lot easier to apply. And
Mhm.
they're more about finding the best. It's also, match.com, what technology's done to online dating, AI may wind up doing to education and the future of work. Who do you work with these days? Aside from the books, we'll include links to the books in the show notes.
Mhm.
But if folks are interested in mind shifting and the ideas that you put out there, who do you work with nowadays to kind of put those ideas into action?
Well, for me, I'm working with agencies that provide professional development to teachers.
Yep.
So in New York, it's the New York State Teacher Center. So any who works for I guess, a public school
Yep.
in New York State can sign up on Frontline, which is the PD portal, and
Yeah.
take the course free. In Washington, I'm working with what they call ESDs. In New York, we call them BOCES, but ed
Yep.
service agencies. And again, I'm on the state portal. So
Mhm.
any teacher or educator in Washington who wants to take one of the 3 courses
Yep.
they can take the course for free. There's a state policy on getting credit for the course. And so
Yep.
I'm looking for actually more organizations that can put these courses free for educators.
However, professional development gets out to K-12.
Yep.
There are programs in mind shifting that are out there that are frequently, operating at the state level, at the district level, however things
Mhm.
work locally. There are ways to get access to this type of stuff. And is there like a website that folks should go to?
Mindshiftingwithmitch.com.
Nice.
That's me.
Yeah.
And then as it turns out, now that I've been doing this with educators for about 5 years, I have 4 people who could all go into any district. So if a
I see.
district wanted to do this,
Yep.
I will put you in touch with somebody who can come into your district and, coach teachers, coach your coaches, coach
Yeah.
your administrators, and work with you all. And I'm more than happy to train more trainers because my goal is to get these techniques out there, and I don't really care who does it.
Right. And you mentioned how you worked outside of, say, K-12 at certain points in your career. It does seem like a lot of these ideas are useful more broadly. Like I would imagine there could be like professional trainings.
Yep.
It's interesting to me as someone who's kind of been on both sides at Kaplan and other places in my career is like professional development is almost treated as different from other kind of workforce training efforts when
Mhm.
in reality it's another type of workforce training.
Yep.
More broad applications, sense making as a trend seems like a pretty massive one, although I agree the language may not be actionable enough. So I
Mhm.
think mind shifting and the idea that there is sort of a conscious effort that can
Yeah.
go into getting better at shifting how you understand the world around
Mhm.
you, that resonates with me. What about broader applications outside of K-12? Also, we didn't talk really about higher ed, which is another place where,
Yep.
in some ways, then part of the mission of higher ed is to help teach your students
Mhm.
to mind shift. But how do you think about the broader implications of some of your work?
Well, my goal is to reach 5 million people. So
Yep.
5 million people, whether they've done it through education or workplace
Mhm.
or read the books or somehow or other, if 5 million people could be resourceful, resilient, and collaborative,
Yeah.
they'd be living happier lives. They'd feel more productive. And we as a world would start solving some of these issues that we're currently locking heads about.
Yeah.
A couple really interesting things is this woman contacted me recently. She actually has attended a course and she's read, the first book a couple times.
Yeah.
She suffers from anxiety. And when I say she suffers from anxiety, she's been hospitalized for
Mm.
weeks at a time because of
Yeah.
anxiety attacks.
Yep.
And she said after attending the course and reading the books, first of all, she now understands what her therapists are telling her about the different parts of the brain.
Right.
Second, she's gotten the tools so she can recognize when she's just at the beginning of an anxiety attack.
Mhm.
Sometimes she's able to then use some of the techniques to like calm herself down.
Yeah.
When she can't do that, she can contact the therapist early enough so
Yeah.
they can make an intervention that doesn't hospitalize her. And it's
Right.
like, that's exactly what I want to happen. Okay.
Mhm.
Another individual was talking about, he's a physician. He was talking about issues that he has at work and how becoming more resourceful, he's no longer looking at these things as failure. He's able to look at things that he's, not that people are dying. Okay. But, you try something, you think you have a solution for somebody, you try it, and the first thing you try doesn't work.
Yeah.
And so you have to try something else. And it's like, changing from getting really down on himself because he suggested something and it didn't work
Yeah.
to understanding that nobody knows what's going to work, but
Mhm.
you're going to try something and you're going to be on the lookout
Yeah.
so that you can quickly adjust rather than waiting until something gets worse. So that really helped him. So the books
Yeah.
are designed really for everybody. The
Mhm.
courses, I've had entrepreneurs take the courses. I've had policemen who've taken the courses because their spouses had heard about them.
Mhm.
The examples in the courses are like 80% taken from education. There's still examples where, you were feeling stuck, you were feeling angry, you had a bad relationship with, your parent or
Sure.
your child. And all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, something that was my survival brain trying to
Right.
protect me
Yeah.
by going into fight or flight mode. But I don't have to accept that. I can just calm it down and I can be more resourceful.
Right. Yeah. Horatio Sanchez, who was on a
Brilliant.
podcast recently and talks about applied neuroscience and just the idea that people want to have plausible scientific explanations for how to behave, how to improve, how to get better, but frequently they don't have access to that information. And perhaps more importantly, we don't really teach it like in our
Right.
schools. And,
Yep.
you're, I guess, by virtue of teaching educators, you're transferring that to students. But what do you think about mind shifting as applied to, certainly as a parent of a 6-year-old, I understand how it's relevant in early childhood.
Mhm.
You know, Piaget was right about schemas and some of the ways in which we sort of sense make as
Mhm.
children. At what point should we start teaching that? How do we incorporate that into our schools at a more first order level? How are you thinking about that?
A lot of these concepts you can teach to 3-year-olds.
Yeah.
Okay. Just to be, emotional awareness, and you can apply them yourself as a model. Like
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, just my grandson's now 4.
Yeah.
Okay. But he was like 2, 2.5. And we were taking care of him. His mom and dad walked out and
Oh,
he
yeah.
starts like, I want my mommy. I want my daddy. Okay. And just like, instead of like talking to him or anything, it just, basically from the material in the course, just giving him a warm environment.
Yeah.
And just like, I just held him and just kind of rocked back and forth. And eventually, when he started coming down a little bit, I read to him one of his books and sang
Yeah.
one of his favorite songs. And it was like, after maybe 15 or 20 minutes of this, he looks at me and says, Baba, I was really upset before, but I'm okay now. Let's play.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
wow, that's what you want, right?
It also might just be he needed his baba, I
Right.
mean, we all contain multitudes, but the frameworks you're putting out there, I think are really relevant kind of across contexts. And then, just at a high level, as we get closer to wrapping up here, what's the easiest way to kind of assimilate what you were talking about? Because, I'm not sure folks can remember 9, but they can remember 3. So, like, what are some of the more concrete takeaways people can bring out of this conversation and carry on with them throughout their lives?
I would start with the resourcefulness part of it. Okay. And in resourcefulness is to understand that you have really two different parts of well, you have many, but two big parts of your brain. One of the parts is your survival parts of the brain, and the other part of the brain is your resourcefulness. And when you are angry or feel stuck, it's probably that your survival parts of the brain are getting in your way, and
Mm.
you have the power to change that.
Yeah.
And to a certain extent, mindfulness or distraction will do that. But just knowing that you have the power to turn your brain around to be more resourceful,
Mhm.
it's like that may be enough in many situations. You start getting angry and it's like, wait a minute, I have the power not to be angry and you can do it. So that's
Yeah.
what I would like to leave with people. Is
Yeah.
everybody has within their own brain the power to be resourceful and resilient and collaborative.
Mhm. Amazing stuff here about mind shifting with Mitch Weisburgh. Mitch, thank you so much for joining me on today's episode.
Michael, thank you for having me.
And for our listeners, hopefully you enjoyed what you heard. If you did, please subscribe, tell your friends, do all the good things.
Can I just say, you
Yeah.
brought up Horatio Sanchez, and I would really want to encourage people to look through your podcast
Yeah.
and listen to that, because that's a brilliant, your questioning was brilliant, and his answers, that would be, I think everybody would find that very helpful.
Awesome. Yeah, we can include that in the show notes for the episode. Thanks, Mitch. Thanks to our listeners. This is Trending in Ed. We'll be back again soon.